The Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Morning to everybody. So, within the last couple weeks, because I live in Maryland, I don't really keep up with politics, but this issue came to my mind, and I thought it really hit me. And in Maryland, like what's currently going through the government and different voting is this quote unquote, like dying with dignity law. Okay, dying with dignity law, which, to say it another way, is physician-assisted suicide. Okay, also referred to sometime as euthanasia. All right, so it's currently going through the different steps up in Maryland. I don't know what the state of Virginia is doing, but up in Maryland, it's going through, and they recently had a hearing. And some of the arguments that go back and forth with regards to this idea of physician-assisted suicide, or what they now try and call dying with dignity, is that when a patient has been diagnosed with a terminally ill diagnosis and confirmed by like two or more physicians, they're given, okay, the question is, should they be given the right and the choice to say, I don't want to live out the full term of my disease, therefore, I want to choose the day in which I die. Okay, I don't want to see the full progress of my terminal disease process and everything that goes into that, meaning can't eat, can't drink, can't change myself, can't do the basic daily functions of life. Therefore, I don't want to see that because it is seen as a period of suffering, and so I want to choose to end my life. I want to choose to end my life. It's currently going through whatever steps bills go through in order to be passed. I don't know where the state is, but I heard these arguments, and they hurt. To see that as a society, we get to the point where we start to say human life, regardless of the state, human life is losing its sacredness, is losing its purpose, is losing its value. Pretty much saying that whenever I get to that point in my disease process where I can't do anything, where I'm essentially worthless, and all I have is the pain of my disease, that life itself, or that section of my life, has no purpose. Therefore, I'm going to cut it off. I'm going to cut it off. Interestingly, there is a ex-football player who played for the Baltimore Ravens who contracted a disease called Lou Gehrig's, also known as ALS, where it's a degenerative neurological disease where it's a terminal disease, which by the end, okay, and he's towards the end of his life process, of that disease process, where he can't even speak. He has different ways of communicating, he can't even speak. And he went and he shared his testimony, and I'm going to get to that testimony, okay? But I want everybody to keep in their mind that idea. And now let's kind of shift to our gospel of today, which comes from John chapter 5, okay, where it's the man who had an infirmity of 38 years, who I think we can probably lump into, well, does he deserve to die with dignity? 38 years is a long time. Most disease processes these days don't last 38 years. They get worse, and then you die sooner than 38 years. So for 38 years, this man who had some sort of infirmity is suffering by the pool. Suffering by the pool. What happened in those 38 years? It's left up to your imagination and my imagination to figure out what it's like to really sit down by a pool 38 years. Not just sit down, and this is probably not a clean place, probably a dirty place. Many, many sick people walking through, lying around, open wounds, coughing, vomiting, feces, It's probably what the situation was around this pool. Say this man suffered for 30 years, I think would be an understatement. I think would be an understatement to say that this man suffered for 38 years, because you put me probably in a situation like that, I don't think I could last a week, maybe a month. If I pray really hard, 2 months, probably call it good. This man suffered. What if he had the chance to say, you know what, my life is just full of suffering. I don't want it anymore. I don't want it anymore. Take my life from me. I see no purpose to my life. What have I done? What have I brought to society? What have I done for my family? What have I done? What's the purpose in my life? I think it's a very fair question you could have offered him, based on current regulation being processed through the government. So what is the purpose of this man's life? Other than we know at the end, he was healed. But for the 38 years, which we only get like kind of one verse in the Bible about, that's what this whole story hangs on. But now to make it more personal, you and me, we all have something that we suffer from. May not be a physical ailment, but you and I, everybody who comes to this church and everybody who walks on this earth suffers from something. May not be 38 years, but it's something. And it's enough to hurt. It's enough to say that I've experienced suffering. Many authors have said to be human is to feel pain. To be human is to experience suffering. Thing is, the reason why a bill like this is being thought of and potentially being passed, and has been passed in I think 8 states so far, to die with dignity, or quote unquote, is what they say, but essentially physician-assisted suicide, is the reason why that is even on the table is because we have failed as a society to see the value in human life and to see the value in suffering. We have failed as a humanity and society to see the sacredness of life, how precious life is, and that through our suffering there is purpose. I'm going to tell you another story. So this last week, my wife and I, we saw this documentary. Most unbelievable documentary you must see, but I don't even know how you would see it because it comes in theaters like periodically. It's called The Dropbox. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of it. It was produced by Focus on the Family. And so the documentary was about this man in Seoul, Korea. He's a pastor of a church. And in Seoul, Korea, there's this, a social problem there that if a young woman were to become pregnant out of wedlock, essentially it was like social suicide, meaning that they would kick them out of school, even though the government said, no, you can't kick them out of school. They would get kicked out of school. They would be thrown out by their families, and they would have no chance at a future. There's no programs to help women who have made a wrong choice, okay, who have made a mistake. There's nothing in that society to help. And so the problem in Korea, among other countries, was that they were taking their children and leaving them on the side of the road, putting them in dumpsters, saying, I can't take this kid. If I keep this kid, I will kill him, and because of the social system, I am going to die too. So they take these babies and they leave them. Strange places. There's a problem. This pastor, Pastor Lee, who would at times have children dropped off at his church door, didn't know what to do with these children. And at the same time this process was happening, him and his wife, they had their first daughter, and then their second child was born with such a deformity, I think, essentially what they called it in the movie was like he essentially had no brain. There was no mental function when his son was born. He was severely deformed. His arms and his limbs, he couldn't walk. He was bedridden for life. You would look at somebody like this and say, this human being who is unable to produce anything has no purpose. What can he do for society other than rely completely on society? Well, as this pastor wrestled with the infirmity of his son, okay, and he kept on running into this problem of babies who were born and just left to die, created a Dropbox in the side of his church. He went to the side of his church, cut a hole out of the wall in the side of his church, and essentially created a mailbox that was 52 centimeters, the average size of a newborn, and it was open. Had a little heat lamp in there. And essentially this Dropbox became a place where a woman or a girl who had a child out of wedlock, who did not want to keep the child, could come and take this baby, put him in this Dropbox, ring the doorbell, either leave a note, not leave a note, up to them, leave their baby, and say goodbye. And this pastor, middle of the night, doorbell rings, he runs down, takes the baby out. He said at one point in the movie, he's like, I have lost track of how many umbilical cords I have cut because sometimes babies are dropped off within 1 to 2 hours of being born. Unbelievable. I think they started this Dropbox right around 2011, and what happened is that since then, 2008, 9, 11, something like that, they have received nearly 354 children in the Dropbox. In the month that the movie was the documentary was being filmed, they said that we have had 8 so far this month. And there's a process when these babies are dropped off that they've worked out with the government. Right now, currently, at least based on the movie, pastor and his wife and the supporting help of the church, they have an orphanage within the church of which they have 15 children that they support. And most of these children either have a deformity, mental retardation, some sort of mental handicap by themselves, okay? And they don't know exactly what will happen with these children, but they, to the best of their ability, feed them, clothe them, change them, take them on field trips, put them through school. But there was one kid who had a deformity in his hands. He was dropped off, and he's one of the 15 kids that actually stayed with the pastor. His name is Yuri, I think. They had strange names being Korean babies. And I lived in Seoul, Korea for 2 years, so it was special for me to actually see this documentary. But this young boy, Yuri, who essentially now looks at Pastor Lee as his father, was asked in the movie, your brother, which is Pastor Lee's biological son, okay, who has no brain, who has no functional capacity, okay, what was should he have been born? Should he have been saved? All the trouble that you see your father and your mother go through, okay, with your brother, do you see a purpose to his life? Boy, at the age of 6 or 7, said, yeah. Because of him, the Dropbox was created, and because of him, many, many children were saved. Because of him and the suffering and the pain that his father, Pastor Lee, and his wife experienced of having a handicapped child, and the different babies that they would see being dropped off, evolved into this idea of the Dropbox. And from the Dropbox, 354 babies and counting have been saved. Little boy at the age of 6 said, my brother has a purpose. My brother who suffers, and my family who has suffered in taking care of him has a purpose. Does his brother produce anything? No. Most he can do is smile. Barely. But a human life, regardless of how disformed, regardless of how unproductive by society standards they are, only God in heaven, through the sanctity and the uniqueness of human life, can make someone have so much purpose. And so now if we come back to the issue going through the Maryland government, this ex-football player who was a Baltimore Raven, who now has no ability to communicate because of his disease and his wheelchair bound, but he can't verbally communicate, but he communicates through different ways, delivered a speech saying that in my last 8 years of suffering with my disease, that has really progressed, I have done more to give back to society and to help people than I have in the first 36, 38, 40 years of his life. Man who was a football player, a millionaire, who accomplished a lot, has said that in the last years of his disease, where his ability is rapidly declining, says, through my suffering, I have been able to give back and touch more people than the years of my health. There's a sacredness to our life. There's a sacredness to the humanity inside of us. Catch to the sacredness is that when the sacredness meets suffering, it's very easy to say, well, what's the point of life? Or what's the point of the problem that I'm facing? What's the point in the pain that I see in my life, the different difficult situations that I have in my life? What's the point of them other than they hurt? And today, the gospel of today, when we see a man who was 38 years with an infirmity, I shared with you the story of Pastor Lee and his disabled son, which led into the Dropbox, which has saved 354 babies and counting, who have gone on to do amazing things in themselves in the homes that they were adopted to, okay? And this football player who sees the first years of his healthy, productive life as being nothing in comparison to the time that he was suffering and disabled. There is something unique and very precious when the sacredness of human life is faced with suffering and we allow God to orchestrate what happens. But the trick is we have to work with God. We have to be willing to be patient with God. We have to be willing to wait for Him to reveal the plan. And waiting is not something we do well as a society. Waiting is not something we do well as a society for God to reveal His plan, and some plans just cannot be rushed. Pastor Lee, when his son was born, asked God why, and even said in the movie at one point, I told God I didn't want this son. He took his statement back, and he repented from his statement. But he asked the question, why? And it wasn't for many years until God revealed to him why. Can you imagine the tragedy of life for those 354 and the 15 kids in that orphanage and the many more to come if this pastor would have dumped his child, said, I don't want to deal with the problem of it? What a tragedy. What a tragedy for us if this man for 38 years who was sitting by the pool said, forget it. Just go dump me somewhere. I'm better off dead. So now what if you and I, in what you suffer with and what I suffer with, say to God, forget it. I'm tired. I don't want to deal with it. I'm tired of this broken relationship. I'm tired of the pain that I feel. And we say, forget it. And we don't wait for God to work in our hearts, to use the sacredness and the uniqueness of our individual lives to bring forth something great. When we don't hang on, we miss out. And not just we miss out, those around us miss out. And this society misses out. And this society misses out. And how do we know that this society misses out? Because we're actually debating whether or not human life is sacred enough to go through suffering. Essentially what we said by looking at this bill is saying that human life is essentially based on productivity. If you cannot produce, then what good is your life? And God says, it's not about production with me. What it is about me is that I gave you the life. I put the life in you. And your life came from me. And I see my life is of value. And my love is of value, so I gave it to you and my only begotten Son. That's where the sacredness of our life comes from. Who are we to say that life isn't sacred? Who are we to say that life is based on productivity? Today God says, no, it's not about productivity. It's about the uniqueness of life that I put in you. And that when you face something that is difficult, that hurts, that sometimes you have no other choice but to wait for 38 years, or whatever period of time God has inscribed for you, today we're reassured that there is a purpose, that there is a meaning. But we have to hold on. We have to be patient. And we have to be willing to just sit in our pain and say it's okay, because God sees our pain, sees what we go through, says, I have a plan, and I have a meaning, and I have a purpose, not just for you, but for those around you and society. And when we don't do our, put in our time and our effort in dealing with the different things that you suffer with, that I suffer with, society misses out, our families miss out, and we miss out on the greatest transformation that happens. Pastor Lee was asked in this documentary, he says, why do you adopt all these kids? Why do you adopt all these kids? His answer? Because God adopted me. It was simple. God adopted me, so I adopt them. If you boil down like all his lessons, God adopted me, so I adopt them. Powerful. Short lifetime of pain and suffering and struggle and strife to get to something so amazing. Will you be patient? Will I be patient? Will you see a greater purpose? Will I see a greater purpose? It's not just about what you suffer with, like the pain in front of you, but it's about a greater picture. Can we get to the greater picture? Can you be patient? Can we open up our minds and our hearts and say, God, I don't understand, but I'm willing to wait, I'm willing to follow until you lead me to where this road is going. Glory be to God forever.